بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. This is supposed to be the first lecture in our course titled Brain Basics. We will be talking about the nervous system. Generally speaking, the nervous system can be divided into two main classes, the central and the peripheral nervous system. Then you can further subclassify the central nervous system into the brain and the spinal cord. Regarding the peripheral nervous system, it can be further subclassified again into somatic and autonomic, and the autonomic into sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is generally the main classification of the parts of the nervous system, or the format of the nervous system. The CNS, as we said, or the central nervous system, is basically made up of the brain and the spinal cord, whereas the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, is made up of nerves and of small groups of neurons clustered together, تجمعات من الخلايا العصبية that you call ganglia. Ganglia. These are only used, this is a term that you can use when you are speaking of groups of nerve cells in the PNS, or in the peripheral nervous system. Now, because of its genius composition, the brain is protected and has to be protected within a bony box. This is the skull, and the spinal cord, which spans a distance of 43 centimeters, is again protected within bone that is now called the vertebral column. You see how God Almighty has made all possible proofs to protect such a genius program. Then, the brain, as we said, is the most complex organ in the central nervous system, and it is composed of neurons, and I'm interested in telling you whatever is related in Arabic. الخلايا العصبية has also blood vessels and has the supportive cells, which are the glial cells. The very first part of the brain, and indeed the largest part ever of the human brain, is what you call the cerebrum. The cerebrum is associated with higher order functions, including the control of voluntary behavior. This is what makes us humans. Thinking, perceiving, planning, and understanding language are all functions coordinated by the cerebrum. The cerebrum is further subdivided into two hemispheres, الفص الأيمن, الفص الأيسر, right and left, and bridging between both hemispheres you will find a bundle of connective fibers that you call the corpus callosum. This is exactly the part where I am pointing right now. The corpus callosum is the connection between the right and the left hemispheres of the cerebrum, which again is the largest part of the brain. You hear something called gray and white matter. Now, gray matter is basically the cortex, أو القشرة المخية, which contains most of the cell bodies of the neurons. And then the white matter contains the tracts, or the axons. More than 2/3 of the cortex is folded into grooves. And these grooves are called sulci, plural for sulcus, and gyri, which is plural form for gyrus. These are the ups and downs and the convolutions that we'll be showing a picture for soon now. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The convolutions, هذه المنحنيات, serves a very important function to increase the brain surface area, allowing for inclusion of many more neurons. Then I think you have inferred right now أو استنتجتوا in the degree of complexity أو درجة التعقيد بتاعت القشرة المخية الآدمية is far more complex than that of any other living organism because of the increased number of neurons that are supposed to be present in a human's brain. وبالتالي الفانكشن الأرقى عند humans compared to any other species. We have what we call the brain map. More colorful pictures of the brain map, numbered and named, and the function of each area well demonstrated and well studied. You can study the function of the cortex by dividing it into parts, exactly like you divide the world map into continents. This is what you get, this colorful designation. Area 1, Area 5, Area 3, each and every one of these is responsible for a particular function in a particular area. This is what you call the brain map. We have lobes in the brain, starting from forward as we go backwards. This is the front aspect of the brain, and this is the back. This is the frontal lobe, the front, the very front, the very first thing that is just above your eyes. This is الفص الجبهي بالعربي. Then the parietal lobe, then the occipital lobe at the back of your head, and the temporal lobe. And as you see, the map draws it all. Emotion is mainly centered in the frontal part, speech in the temporal part, sensation in the parietal part, and vision basically centered in the occipital part. So, if we want to go through more detail, the frontal lobe is mainly responsible for emotion, and then for other functions like initiating and coordinating motor movements, as well as for higher cognitive skills, including problem solving, thinking, planning, and organization. And it goes without saying that you have now expected that any disease that affects this part, let this be a mass, a tumor, or any disease process, is liable to affect these functions in particular: problem solving, planning, and thinking, let alone problems related to emotion. This is the frontal lobe. Second, the parietal lobe, as is seen here, mainly responsible for sensation and then attention and language. Damage to the parietal lobe on the right side can result in difficulty going through places that you are quite familiar with, climbing the stairs of your own building, entering your own room. This can present a problem if you have a disease in the right parietal lobe. On the left side, if it is injured, then there is definitely an inability to understand spoken and sometimes written language. This is as far as the parietal lobe is basically concerned. The occipital lobe is primarily interested in vision. It processes visual information. Whatever you see with your retina in your eyes is going to be interpreted and turns to something meaningful in the occipital part of your brain. Finally, the temporal lobe, which you call al-fass al-sadghi, right above your ears, is called a temporal lobe, and as you expect, it's just above your ears, so it processes auditory information. Auditory means relating to hearing, and this is the part of the brain mainly interested in processing info related to hearing. Something else, it integrates information from other senses and is responsible through two main structures, very famous structures in the temporal lobe, called the hippocampus and the amygdala, for short-term memory and for learned emotional responses. And we mean by learned emotional responses that you shake hands with people when you meet them, for example. This is a learned emotional response. You lose this when you have a pathology or a disease in the temporal lobe. And I think that many of you have read already something about short-term memory, and that Alzheimer's disease in particular is the disease that hits this very important function, short-term memory. So you expect now that the hippocampus, part of the temporal lobe, is the primary site for disease in patients with Alzheimer's disease, which is translated into problems in short-term memory. Generally speaking, after having gone through the different lobes of the brain and the brain map, which reflects function of the different brain parts, we can also use another schema or system for dividing the brain parts into forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. And this classification in particular is an evolutionary classification. يعني ده اللي بيعكس تطور المخ الآدمي. والتقسيمة دي هي اللي حصلت as regards biology and evolution. الفوربرين ده اللي حاليا is seen in the adult contemporary الإنسان المعاصر a human being as the cerebrum اللي احنا قلنا عليه أكبر أجزاء المخ على الإطلاق plus what you call the basal ganglia plus the thalamus and hypothalamus. مجموع كل هذه ال parts constitutes together the forebrain. But we will complicate matters a bit more. Basal ganglia, which we mean by the cerebral nuclei that are located deep within the brain matter. These in particular are centers that are responsible for coordinating muscle movements and rewarding useful behaviors. So cerebrum plus basal ganglia plus others constitute the forebrain. What are these others? The thalamus and the hypothalamus. And these two in particular you can add up together to give you the term diencephalon. The diencephalon is then the thalamus and the hypothalamus. What is the thalamus? A very prestigious center in the brain, in the forebrain, that passes the sensory information to القشرة المخية or the cerebral cortex. And the hypothalamus is a different story. It has to do with controlling appetite, defensive attitudes, reproductive behaviors, and sleep wakefulness. This is the center for sleep and awakening, for sex drives, and for appetite. This is the hypothalamus. When you add hypothalamus to thalamus, as I said, gives you the diencephalon, and when you add this to basal ganglia and the cerebrum, this gives you ultimately the forebrain. The midbrain, on the other hand, although is small as regards its size, it is a totally different story. It is made up of two pairs of small hills زي الهضبات أو الجبلين صغيرين من النيوكلياي أو تجمعات الخلايا العصبية. These are called the colliculi, and the singular form is called colliculus. So these are collections of neurons, as I said, يعني تجمعات من الخلايا العصبية. الكريتيكال رول بتاعهم بيبقى في حاجتين، في الفيجوال وفي الاوديتوري. And again, auditory means hearing, reflexes, and in relaying or in connecting this type of information to the thalamus, which we said last slide is going to pass these sensory information to the cerebral cortex. So the colliculi are really important in the visual and in the auditory pathways. في الvision أو في البصر والسمع. These two colliculi constitute very important stations. This is the midbrain, and this is a drawing of the midbrain. This is a whole cerebral hemisphere. This is المخيخ أو الcerebellum, which we will be soon talking about. This is the brainstem أو جذع المخ, and this is the corpus callosum, which we said is a bunch of or a bundle of fibers that connects both hemispheres together. Now this very part to which I am pointing right now is here projected on a larger scale. This is what we mean by the midbrain, which is made up of a superior and an inferior colliculus, right and left. So this gives you the colliculi, and the colliculi in collection or in aggregate together constitute the midbrain, and we said this makes sense as far as vision and auditory reflexes are concerned before these impulses or this information reaches the thalamus and from thence to the cerebral cortex. We are left with the last part of the brain, which is called the hindbrain, and hind means خلفي. What is this hindbrain أو المخ الخلفي? This is made up of three parts, as is highlighted in red. The pons, which literally means the bridge or الكوبري, and the medulla oblongata أو النخاع المستطيل, and the cerebellum, which is the المخيخ. So the pons, the medulla oblongata, together these control your vital functions. المراكز الحيوية عند الإنسان, like his respiratory center التنفس, heart rhythms نبضات القلب, and blood glucose levels are all adjusted at this level, controlled by the pons and the medulla oblongata. You add to this the cerebellum or المخيخ, which controls movement and cognitive processes that require precise timing. Plus, for experimentation وفي الطب التجريبي, it has to do with an important role in Pavlovian learning. And you know that whatever relates to Pavlovian learning means الارتباط الشرطي. And you can Google the word Pavlov or Pavlov's experiments. Now this is, again, in blue is a highlight of whatever is called the hindbrain. This is the pons, the medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum. The rest of the brain is the forebrain, and this part in purple is alone the midbrain. Now we have gone through the different parts of the brain as regards the evolutionary process. The spinal cord, اللي هو اسمه النخاع الشوكي أو الحبل الشوكي. This is an extension of the brain. This is the brain as it goes down inside its bony box, which is now called the vertebral column. The skull has ended upwards, and the spinal cord is known to receive sensory information from all parts of the body. Below the head, whatever you feel with your hands, whatever touches your skin, any pain, any temperature, whatever is there below the level of the head, what happens then above the level of the head is perceived by the brain, and whatever happens below the level of the head is perceived by the spinal cord. A very important function for the spinal cord is to initiate reflexes, like reflexes or reflex responses to pain. A pinprick causes you to withdraw your hand. All of this takes place on the level of the spinal cord. This is a very nice picture of the brain in continuity with the spinal cord, all dissected as one single piece, in continuity. The brain with its two hemispheres Now you do expect that the cerebellum is underneath this. This is the spinal cord, and these are the peripheral nerves as they go outside the roots and radicals of the spinal cord. This is the C and the P and S, the central and the peripheral nervous system. This is the brain, and this is the spinal cord as it goes protected downwards within its vertebral column. What else for the spinal cord? It relays the sensory information to the brain. Whatever, as I said, is felt below the level of the head is perceived by the spinal cord, and then it is to be communicated to the مركز قيادة العمليات الرئيسي اللي هو to the brain. So the spinal cord will relay the sensory information to the brain and to the cortex in particular. So it generates the spinal cord nerve impulses to control muscles and viscera. Viscera is a medical term that refers to الأحشاء اللي هي الرئة، الأمعاء، urinary bladder اللي هي المثانة، whatever. So the spinal cord generates nerve impulses أو نبضات عصبية تتحكم في حركة العضلات والأحشاء. whether النبضات العصبية دي هتكون ريفلكس أو كرد فعل شرطي أو بشكل إرادي voluntary commands جاية أساسا من الcerebrum, which is the biggest part and the most important part of the brain. Now, we will start a new part of the lecture. What about the basic unit of the nervous system? The nervous system is made up of nerve cells, and we call these the neurons. They are not just only the structural but also the functional units of the nervous system. This is a single nerve cell or the single neuron. It looks like a ghost. This is the neuron. Now, number of neurons per brain in a single brain varies drastically or dramatically from one species to another. The brain of the toad or of the frog is totally different from that of the dog, is totally different from that of the apes اللي هي الحيوانات العليا زي الغوريلا, and definitely totally different from that in the الإنسان العاقل, which we call the Homo sapiens or الصورة الحالية من البشر. Mammalian brain contains between 100 million to 100 billion neurons, as I said, depending on the species. But you can imagine from this picture how really big a human brain is when you put this as a ratio between brain to whole body size. This is the size of our brain. This is the size of an elephant's brain. It's just a little bit larger. This is the size of a dolphin's brain, just a little bit larger. Put everything in perspective. لما تكون بتدرس حاجة زي كده تدرسها بالتناسب، تناسب حجم مخ الإنسان لحجم جسمه, and you see that it is that much big, and that of an elephant is that much big. You really know now how big your brain is. And this is how small a mouse brain is. And this is the macaque, one of the famous species of monkeys. This is the macaque's brain. And the gorilla, which is practically larger than our size, this is how big its brain is. And again برضو نبص على درجة تعقيد القشرة بتاعتها. You'll find it is far simpler when you compare it to الأخاديد الثانيات اللي موجودة في الكورتكس of the human brain. Again الكلام ده كله معمول to scale, يعني this is scaled, فيها مقياس رسم. This is the human brain, this is the ape or gorilla's brain, and this is the elephant's brain again. This is majestic, really majestic. والصورة دي depicts أو بتوضح التطور بتاع الإنسان من أول ما كان الهومو هابيلس إلى أن أصبح الهومو إيركتس أو الإنسان المنتصب، إلى أن بقى دلوقتي الهومو سابينز اللي هو الإنسان العاقل في صورته الحالية. and as you see قد إيه تطور الحجم بيكبر، بس not just so، حتى حصل تعديلات سبحان الله في الريشيو ما بين السيريبرم للسيريبيلم، and this is our final form. This is how we look like now in the 21st century. This is a picture of the neuron اللي هي قلنا عليها الوحدة التركيبية والوظيفية للجهاز العصبي. This is a neuron or a nerve cell. A typical neuron has got these parts: جسم أو cell body, and then it has got الطول ده بتاعها. This is called the axon, and the axon ends by what you call the axon terminals. كمان السيل بادي نفسه بيتفرع إلى processes أو نهايات that you call the dendrites. So you have a cell body and you have a neurite. والneurite دي هي تشكل الامتدادات اللي هي made up of this axon and of these dendrites and the axon terminals. This is the classic كده structure of a neuron. تاني, this is another neuron or خلية عصبية. This is its cell body أهو, وطلع منها البروسيسز بتاعتها اللي هي اسمها dendrites طول ما هي طالعة من السيل بادي، وفي امتداد طويل ضخم اللي هو اسمه الأكسون. Alright, دي واحدة تانية. This is another neuron with its cell body and with its dendrites, and now there is a communication between this and that. وطبعا you expect this if you want electricity تمشي ما بين الخلايا, so they have to be communicated together, and we'll come to that. السيل بادي as we said hosts أو يستضيف النيوكليوس and the cytoplasm. يعني لو خدت فيها مقطع كده وفتحتها هتلاقي إن this is the cell body of the neuron, ويحتوي أهو على العقل المدبر اللي هو النيوكليوس. whatever is turquoise in color أو أزرق فاتح, this is the cytoplasm اللي عايمة فيه الجسيمات الصغيرة اللي بتشكل السيل بادي itself. طيب, الدندرايتس اللي هي البروسيسز او الامتدادات اللي بتطلع من جسم الخلية نفسه او من السيل بادي. These are thin structures from the cell body that extend مسافات عبارة عن احيانا hundreds of micrometers, قد تصل الى امتار, متر او متر ونص كمان في بعض الاحيان. And branching multiple times giving rise to a complex dendritic tree. هو ده اللي بيعمل لنا الشبكة العصبية. الأكسون أهو زي ما قلنا it takes origin in the cell body, a special cellular extension that arises from the cell body. تاني أهو ادي السيل بادي جواها نيوكليوس and cytoplasm, ادي الثين extension اللي هي الاكسون, وادي الدندرايتس اللي هي بتتشابك together to form a network او شبكة. This is the end of the neuron. It ends by what you call axon terminals. لو جينا كبرنا شوية الاكسون terminals دي هنلاقي ان في خلية بتنتهي وخلية تانية بتبتدي, وما بينهم وبين بعض في فالق هنا أو space. You call this, كل الالتقاء ده you call it a synapse, والسينابس ده في space زي ما احنا بنقول اسمه synaptic cleft, وما قبل السينابس خلية بنسميها pre-synaptic neuron, وما بعد السبيس في البوست synaptic neuron. يعني أنا لو جيت لصورة زي دي أهي, this is a cell, this is another cell, وهنا هيحصل السينابتيك union أو communication ما بينهم وبين بعض. So you call this cell a presynaptic cell, and this one a postsynaptic cell. This is the area of synapse, and the space in between is called the synaptic cleft. مهم لأن هتحدث عنده events بتكفل في الآخر إن ال electric impulse اللي اتصنعت في ال presynaptic neuron توصل بأمان للبوست سينابتيك نيورون، وهكذا يستمر التوصيل للنبضات العصبية and the process is successfully propagated. احنا عندنا او سمعنا عن ان مش كل البرين او spinal cord معمول من خلايا عصبية، لا قلنا كمان معانا في blood vessels وفي supportive cells that collectively are known as the glial cells. هم ليهم انواع كتير واشهرهم الخلايا النجمية اللي هي الاسtrocytes because they really look like astrocytes like stars. They provide physical support to the neuron بمعنى ان هما they through their processes هما كمان عندهم processes بس you don't call them dendrites اسمهم processes. through الكلام ده هما بيعملوا شبكة بتشيل في المكان ده النيورون so it practically physically supports the neuron. هما كمان اللي بيعملوا cleaning up للremains بتاعت بقايا الخلايا الميتة أو dead neurons and they nourish the neurons. احنا بنقول ان الخلايا العصبية خلايا شديدة الرقي والارستقراطية ومحتاجة حد يخدمها. Whatever serves this function are the astrocytes. They support, they clean up and they nourish بمعنى they feed the neurons. في نوع تاني من الجلايا they are responsible for again supporting the neurons زائد ان هم بيصنعوا مادة هنتكلم عنها very shortly now which is called the myelin sheath اللي هو كأنك بتعمل عزل كهربي ببلاستيك حوالين السلك عشان تضمن ان ما يلمسش وما يحصلش منه short circuits ويحصل لخبطة في الكهرباء بتاعة البني آدم. النوع الثالث من الجلايا and we are not interested in the names بس تعرفوا انه there are groups or different types of glial cells with different sorts of functions زي تاني cleaning up ال CNS debris يعني البقايا والمخلفات. Then as I said إن نوع من الجلايا I'm returning back to this type of glia which produces the myelin sheath that insulates axons. بيعمل العزل الكهربي اللي احنا بنقول عليه. ادي الاكسون اللي هو الثين بروسيس اللي بتطلع من نهاية السيل بودي. بنلاقي ان في الكابل ده الكابل السلك نفسه اللي هو لونه احمر معزول بطبقة خارجية اللي هي هنا لونها ازرق. الطبقة دي تكوينها الحقيقة عبارة عن فاتس وهو ده اللي بيضمن ادي الاكسون ماشي جوه layers and layers من المادة اللي بنسميها المايلين شيث اللي بتكفل ان السلك يفضل محمي وان النبضة العصبية او الالكتريك امبالس تبقى propagated او تنتشر في سلام وامان وفي المسار الصح من غير ما يحصل مس كهربي. المايلين شيث دي بتبقى used to insulate axons and accelerate impulse transmission تسرع بالتوصيل الكهربائي. في خلايا الحقيقة منوط بيها أو responsible for تصنيع مادة المايلين في السنترال نيرفس سيستم. whatever takes up this function are the oligodendrocytes اللي احنا جبنا سيرتها من شوية كنوع من أنواع الجلايا. بس على مستوى peripheral nervous system the cell that is responsible for forming the myelin sheath are called the Schwann cells in the P that is the peripheral nervous system. Now we will start the third and last part of our lecture. احنا دلوقتي هنتكلم على الimpulse pathway.